We've also got some new polling out just an hour ago. It shows how Americans feel about the president's decision to attack those nuclear sites in Iran. So here's what we know. 56% of Americans surveyed here disapprove of the military action in Iran, while 44% approve it. When asked if they think the strikes will make Iran more of a threat to the U.S. or less, more than half said more. Now, President Trump has announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, of course, but some Americans are skeptical about the president's motivations.
I think it's important to remember that there has been a repeated pattern of using diplomacy and negotiations to try to catch Iran off guard and launch sneak attacks on Iran.
Isaac Dever, Chuck Brocha, and Ashley Davis are joining me again. I'm kind of cautiously reading these numbers because things have just moved so quickly since the initial strikes, but I always look at the number of independents, and I was surprised there to see that number be 60% over 40. You're nodding.
Yeah, because that's the most important piece. We expect Democrats and Republicans to run to their corner no matter almost what the issue is. Overall, in all the polling I've ever done, most folks are against war, against sending troops to war. But what's the independent number? Because as we move into the midterms, there's only a small group of people. It's not a presidential election, and it's those most engaged, and it's those independents in swing districts that'll have the biggest impact.
What do you see in this?
You see that there is not an appetite for foreign engagements, and that includes, I think, yes, look at the independents, but even among Republicans, there is a split that's there. We don't know given how quickly things are moving, and also given how for so many issues, the Republican base and Republican officials just snap back into whatever Donald Trump is saying to do, and with no opposition in Congress coming, whether that will hold. But it does show that there is an issue here of people not wanting this to happen, even as a lot of people who are thinking seriously about what's going on in Iran think that stopping Iran from having a nuclear weapon.
And what happens next is obviously going to color this view. You know, when we're looking at the numbers, do you trust Trump to make the right decisions on use of force in Iran? Again, 55% no. That's very different from just, are these strikes okay or not? Ashley, what do you hear in that doubt?
Well, first I want to say, and I should have said this at the beginning, that we should be thanking our United States military for what they did. What was accomplished with no lives lost was an amazing feat. In my lifetime, Iran and the nuclear weapons have always been a horrible threat to this country, and they support terrorists more than any other country in the world. So I think we can't lose sight of that. I do think that people are tired of war, obviously, and the same people on the Democrat side that are saying we shouldn't do Iran, then we probably shouldn't do Ukraine either. I mean, it's the same argument. And so there is if this ends, like you say, and we're not in this for another year or 2 years or even 6 months, what was accomplished by most likely destroying at least most of their nuclear capability is a win.
And what happens if there's some sort of retaliation, or that would change all this, and hopefully nothing like that will happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if we have to send troops and all of that is a whole different story.
Israel's government says it has now agreed to a ceasefire with Iran, and Iranian media also reporting that a ceasefire has begun. But the Israel Defense Forces accusing Tehran of a ceasefire violation already, saying they have intercepted 2 missiles launched from Iran. The Israeli defense minister vowing to, quote, respond with force. But a senior security official in Iran tells CNN no missiles have been fired at the enemy, as he describes them so far. Well, US President Donald Trump urging both sides to stick to this ceasefire, this truce, saying, please do not violate it, exclamation mark. Well, a new CNN poll shows US airstrikes against Iran over the weekend are broadly unpopular. 44% of respondents say they approve, 56% disapprove. Nearly 6 in 10 respondents say they fear the strikes will increase the Iranian threat to the United States. Large majorities of independents and Democrats disapprove the US military action, while 82% of Republicans approve. Let's get more now from Jennifer Kavanagh. She is a senior fellow and director of military analysis at Defense Priorities. She joins me now live from Washington. Just out of interest, what do you make of that polling, that snap polling, after all those strikes only Sunday this week? It is now Tuesday.
Well, I don't find them that surprising. There really is not an appetite in the United States for another adventure in the Middle East. People are tired of foreign wars, especially after Iraq and Afghanistan proved to be quite disastrous and are very broadly unpopular across the Republican and the Democratic Party. So I'm not that surprised that another use of military force would be unpopular and probably spark worries among a lot of voters that this is just the start of another long-term campaign in the region.
You have deep insight into military strategy. So let's just take a step back here and consider the following. Donald Trump has taken credit overnight regional time, for this ceasefire, what he calls the end to this 12-day war. We have seen certainly some fragility, if not violation, of that very ceasefire in the past hours or so. As you assess what you see going on and strategy from both sides, what's your snap assessment?
Well, it's not uncommon take a little bit of time for a ceasefire to take hold, for hostilities to stop. So I'm not that surprised that there's some uncertainty about where things stand right now. I think things are certainly trending in the direction of at least a temporary stop to the airstrikes that we've seen. Israel was signaling even yesterday that it was getting towards the end of its target list, both because the United States had signaled it wanted to de-escalate, but also probably it's running low on air defense interceptors as well as its own munitions. And Iran similarly has suffered significant military damage and doesn't have an endless stockpile of missiles. So I would expect to see a temporary cessation of hostilities here. However, the bottom line is that the fundamental problem of Iran's nuclear program hasn't really been addressed. We still don't know where most of Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium is. We still don't know how much of their nuclear enrichment capabilities remain. So it's not clear to me that this is the end forever, even if it's the end for right now.
Yeah, and as your recent analysis overnight points out, there were real questions about what was accomplished over the past 2 weeks, given the high risks and the costs, of course. There are two other points that you make. Some in the US and many in Israel are pushing for more strikes and a broader regime change goal. And secondly, it could be a very long road to diplomacy, even if this ceasefire provides an off-ramp and opens or reopens a door to diplomacy. And you say it's not clear that Donald Trump has the patience to stick with it. Explain.
Well, there are certainly groups within the United States and in Israel that have hoped that this would be a broader war, that it would eventually bring down the Iranian regime with the hopes that whatever followed would be better. It's not clear to me that that's the case. In fact, it seems more likely that if the current regime were to fall, you'd end up with a failed state, which would probably be even worse. In terms of, thinking about the path back to diplomacy, at this point, the Iranians have very little reason to trust Donald Trump's word. He's now twice talked about having negotiations and then scuttled those negotiations himself by greenlighting military operations, first Israel's and then the United States. So it's not clear to me that the United States can offer credible assurances to Iran that if it negotiates, it's going to be protected from future attacks. So for any Iranian regime, that has to be a calculation. Is negotiating worth it?